We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Aleph in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 31a. The Mishnah continues, Beis Hillel Omer, and Beis Hillel say, Ein hektish. If you have a situation of hektish betos, it is not going to be hektish. And the Mishnah explains, Keitzad, how so? Amar, let's say a person says, Shor shachor sheyotza mi beisi rishon, the black ox that comes out of my house first, harehu hektish, that is going to be hektish, v'yotza lavan, and then a white one comes out of his house. Beis Shammai Omer, Beis Shammai say hektish, it is going to be hektish. Beis Hillel Omer, eino hektish, and Beis Hillel say it will not be hektish. Or let's say the person says dinar zahav, the golden dinar, sheyala biyadi rishon, which comes up in my hand first. Harehu hektish, it's going to be hektish. V'yola shal kesef, and then a silver one comes up in his hand. Beis Shammai Omer hektish, Beis Hillel Omer eino hektish. Beis Shammai say it is hektish, and Beis Hillel say it is not hektish. Or let's say the person says, Chavis shal yayin, shatala biyadi rishon, the barrel of wine, which comes up in my hand first, harehi hektish, it's going to be hektish. V'yosa shal shemen, then it turns out to be oil. Beis Shammai omrim hektish, Beis Shammai say that it is hektish. Beis Hillel omrim eino hektish, and Beis Hillel say that it is not hektish. And the Gemara says, Beis Shammai omrim hektish v'chulu. Again, Beis Shammai say that if you have hektish betos, hektish done in error, it is going to be hektish. And the Gemara says, Ma'ahu de Beis Shammai. What's the reason of Beis Shammai? Di alfinon tchilas hektish mi sof hektish. They learned the initial consecration from sof hektish, from the end of consecration. That's a reference to tmura. Let's say a person says that he wants the kedusha from a particular animal to go on a different animal. So we say he's not able to switch the kedusha, but instead the tmura, that substitute itself, it also gets the kedusha that's sof hektish. Ma tmura, just like by tmura, afilu betos, it's going to be chal. The kedusha will be chal, even if it was done in error. Af hektish afilu betos. So too by hektish, that also is going to be chal, even if it is done in error. Beis Hillel Omer, and Beis Hillel say hani mili tamura. That's only true by tamura. Aval achuse hektish betos lo machsinin. But for the initial consecration, for that to become hektish, if there is an error, it is not going to be hektish. And the Rosh explains, mi sof hektish, Beis Shammai, they learn from sof hektish, tamura, kare sof hektish. Tamura is referred to as sof hektish, lefi shektushasa ba mikoach acheres, because the kedusha by tamura is really coming from a different animal. In other words, again, the person was saying, this animal should be a substitute for that animal, and the halach is the original animal retains its kedusha, and the substitute also gets the kedusha, but the kedusha is derived from the original animal. Ma tamura afilu betos, just like by tamura tzchal, even if it's done in error, kedamrinan betmura, like it says in tamura, Perak yesh bekarbanos yel rabos shogeg kamezid. We say over there to include shogeg kamezid, whether it's done by mistake or on purpose, it's the same thing. Umefarish Rabbi Yochanan hasam. Now Rabbi Yochanan explains over there, kisaver lomar shor shachar. Let's say thought to say a black ox. V'yamar Lavan said a white ox. Kisaver lomar tmuras ola. Thought to say tmuras ola, and a substitute for an ola. V'yamar tmuras shlamim, said a substitute for a shlamim. V'uadin nami kisaver lomar shor shachar yet tmura v'amar Lavan kadosh. In all of these situations, it's going to be kadosh. V'chein b'masnisa nami. The same is true in our Mishnah as well. Yamar shor shachar sheyatza mi beisi rishon. He says the black ox that comes out of my house first, yeh hektish, it should be hektish. V'yatza lavan, and then the white one comes out kadosh, so it is going to be kadosh. The kedusha is going to be chal. But the Gemara asks, Beis Shammai, according to Beis Shammai, Ma ilu amar, what if a person would say, Harezeh tachazeh, that's the statement you make by Tmura, this animal should be instead of this animal, Lachatzi hayom, and it should happen at midday. So mihave Tmura mehi shaita, would it really become Tmura from that moment? Ela adamati chatzi hayom would have it Tmura. It's only going to happen at midday that the Kedusha, the Tmura, is going to be chal. So hachinami, so here also, Lechi migloy milsa, when the matter is revealed, when the matter is understood. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Rapapa says, Lekach nemar rishon, that's what it means to say when he says rishon, Lecheshayotza rishon, the first one, when it comes out. And the Rosh explains the Gemara as follows: Beis Shammai ma'ilu amar harezeh temura zeh lechatzi hayom. According to Beis Shammai, if someone said this should be a substitute for this at chatzi hayom at midday, mihave temura mehishaita, would it be temura from that moment? Yamar harezeh temura kashiyagia chatzi hayom. If the person says it's a temura at midday, milsa depshita de'ena temura at shiyagia hazman shekava. It's obvious the temura is only going to be chal when that time arrives. V'yaz al pi dibur lemafreya cholala kedusha mechatzos veilach. That at that point in in time, it's going to be chal from chatzos. Hachanami. Now, if we apply that logic here as well, the Gemara means to say as follows: when it becomes revealed retroactively, sheyiskayimu devarav, that his words were fulfilled. She'amar shur shachar sheyatsa mi beisi rishon tachal kedusha olav. He said, the black ox that comes out of my house first, the kedusha should be chal. V'chol zman shalon eskayimu devarav. The point of the Gemara is, if that doesn't actually happen, if the white one comes out, so ein kan kedusha klal, there should be no kedusha over here. How could Beis Shammai say that the kedusha is chal? V'lo dami l'temuras tos, and the Rosh explains, don't compare this to the case of temura by error, where we said it's chal. Dehasam ani mekayim devarav mashotzi befiv, because all of those cases, what the person actually said, what was said verbally, actually is what actually happens. V'af agav de'in piv v'libo shavin. The point over there was that what he said was not what he intended to say. What was in his mouth and what was in his mind was not the same. There's a gzeras hakasav that even if what he said was not what he intended to say, it's going to be a temura. But over here, if we're going to change that which he said one thing, the black ox, and then it turned out to be the white ox. We don't find that that's going to be holy by temura, and that shouldn't work over here as well. And so then the Gemara answered again. Rav Papa said, therefore he said Rishon. Amar Rav Papa says, Lekach nema Rishon lecheshayotza Rishon. Therefore he said Rishon, that which comes out Rishon. Kilomar, what that means to say is as follows: Vadei mitemura lo matzi Beis Shammai lemeilef l'shanos mashotzi befiv. Obviously, from Temura, there's no way we're learning out that we change what he says. Elatayim of the Beis Shammai, but the real reason of Beis Shammai is mishum demitarzi l'diburi, that there is a way in this case to understand that which he is saying. We understand his words hachi as follows: Shor shachar sheyatzmi beisi rishon l'shechorim kadosh. It means the first ox of the black oxes that come out. Not that the very first one has to be a black one, but when they start coming out, the first black one among the black ones, that should be kadosh. The Rosh notes it should have said rather, Papa says, because we're really changing our understanding. We don't use the word ella because there was no amora mentioned in the first approach of the Gemara, so we don't use the word ella, but really this is a new approach, a new understanding of what's happening in the Mishnah according to Beis Shammai. And the Gemara continues and asks, "V'hashor shachar ka'amar," but didn't he say a black ox? Milo askinon to lesle elahai. Aren't we talking where he only has one black ox? So how could you say that what he means to say is the first of my black ox and the first black one to come out? And the Gemara says, "Lo, no, tzricha is needed." The case of the Mishnah is simple. The islay train tlasa, he has two or three, and that's exactly what he's saying, or rather, that's how we understand what he's saying. What he means to say is the first of my black oxen to come out, the first black one to come out, that will be kadosh, and therefore the kedusha is chal. And the Gemara continues, Beis Hillel omrim. Now Beis Hillel, they respond to Beis Shammai. Why do they say that the kedusha is not chal? Imkein sheyotza barishon miboile. If so, the way that the person should have phrased it is he should have said sheyotza barishon, the one that comes out first. And the Rosh over here explains hachi garsinon ubeis Hillel imkein sheyotza rishon miboile aval midukamer mibesi. From the fact that in the Mishnah, or from the fact that the person in the Mishnah added the word from my house, mashma imshor shachar yotza min habayis tchila. So the way Beis Hillel understand that sounds like if a black ox comes out first from my house, and so therefore it cannot be interpreted in the fashion of Beis Shammai, the first of my black shor, of my black shvarim that come out. But the Gemara continues, Amarle Rava mi Barnish le Ravashi. Rava mi Barnish said to Ravashi, Hi hektish betos. So are you going to refer to that as hektish betos? The language of the Mishnah was that Beis Shammai say hektish betos. If you have hektish in error, then it's considered hektish. But here, that's not hektish betos. Hektish bekavanu. This is really hektish that was intentional. According to Beis Shammai, what the person really meant was the first of the black bulls that come out. That's the one that will be hektish. And to that, the Gemara says, Mishum da'ati ledibure kama. The reason why we're calling this hektish betos is because really, the way he originally makes a statement, it doesn't exactly sound like this. We're sort of reinterpreting the statement from the initial understanding of the statement, and that also is referred to as hektish betos, even though technically speaking, there really wasn't an error in this situation. But the Gemara continues, V'savri Beis Shammai hektish betos, lo have a hektish, but according to that, do Beis Shammai really hold that if there was an actual error, it wouldn't be hektish? In other words, the Gemara is asking, the implication from this whole discussion is that in this case, there wasn't really an error according to Beis Shammai. It's just a question how we interpret the words of the individual. They could have been interpreted in another fashion, and we're saying, no, that's not what it meant. But it sounds like if you had an actual error, it wouldn't be hektish according to Beis Shammai. But is that really true? Vatnan, but we learned in the Mishnah, Misha Nadar ben Nazir, let's say a person makes an oath to be a Nazir, V'nishal lechachamim v'hitiro, and he asked the chachamim, and they undo the neder. V'haisalo behema mufreshes, and then he has an animal which he designated it was going to be used for the karbanos of the Nazirus. So teitze v'tira be'eder, so that animal goes out, it can graze in the flock, the animal does not have kedusha. Amru Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel, they say to Beis Shammai, Iatem modim shehektish betosu. Don't you admit that this is a case of hektish betos? This is a case sort of like a hektish in error, because he made it hektish, thinking he was a nazir, but then the nazirus is undone. V'teitze v'tira be'eder. And in this case, what does it say? Well, you let it go out, it grazes among the flock, there is no kedusha. So Beis Hillel is saying to Beis Shammai, here's an example of a case of hektish betos that is not hektish. It's a proof to us, but that would imply that Beis Shammai, they hold that hektish betos, even when there's a real error, it actually is hektish. Mechlal de sabri Beis Shammai, hektish betos have a hektish. That discussion, that response of Beis Hillel to Beis Shammai, that implies that Beis Shammai hold that even if you have a situation of hektish that's actually an error, it actually is hektish. And so the Gemara says, no, ela Beis Hillel who the kato. Rather, it's actually Beis Hillel that made a mistake in understanding Beis Shammai's view. Savri Tamai de Beis Shammai, they thought that the reasoning of Beis Shammai was mishum de hektish betos have a hektish, because hektish in error is hektish. V'yamri lahon Beis Shammai, and Beis Shammai respond to Beis Hillel, la mishum hektish betos. So we're not saying that the reason why it's hektish is because we hold that a hektish in error is hektish. Ela mishum da'ati l'dibure kama. We were only saying it in a case where maybe originally you would have thought the interpretation of the person's words was different, but really we're understanding what the person really meant. That's where we say it's hektish. Otherwise, we would not say it's hektish. But still, the Gemara says, "V'savri Beis Shammai hektish betos lo have a hektish." Do Beis Shammai really hold that hektish betos is not hektish? Tashma, come and hear the following proof. The Mishnah says later on, "Hayu mahalchin b'derech," if they were walking on the road, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis.